Whether you're president of your student council, on your local school board, or maybe you're just trying to persuade your family that you should go to Paris instead of Disney World for vacation this year, you're going to need to learn how to build coalitions. In fact, if you find yourself in any complex multi-party negotiation, you're going to need to find a way to build a winning coalition. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 key steps you can take to build and maintain a winning coalition in negotiation. Also, be sure to stay to the end when I will share with you the most common mistake people make in building these coalitions. I'm also going to share with you the most important characteristic that helps hold a coalition together. But first, let's start with, why do people build coalitions in the first place? So coalitions only happen in negotiations that involve more than 2 parties. Because whenever you move from a 2 to a 3, 4, 5, 6 party negotiation, it means I'm not just trying to persuade one person, but I'm trying to persuade at least a few, maybe to build a majority, maybe to build a consensus, maybe to get a unanimous viewpoint. So people tend not to be interested in coalitions when they can get something done on their own. The biggest reason why we build a coalition is because we can't get it done on our own. So if you think, for example, why did the United States in the first Persian Gulf War build a coalition? Was it because we wanted to be nice? I don't think that many people think the United States is all that nice on the world stage. Rather, it was because we understood that in order to execute a successful war thousands of miles away from the homeland, we would need a bunch of countries on our side that would give us access to bases, that would allow us to refuel, that would provide logistical support. So people tend to build coalitions when they need help getting something done. So let me talk to you about the 3 steps for building coalitions. First, how do I target coalitional partners? Well, what I want to look at is, what are the issues that need to be resolved, and I want to identify who are the parties who have a lot of power in this particular negotiation, meaning they influence the other players at the table and have shared interests with mine. In other words, our preferred outcome is what their preferred outcome are. And those are my key allies. I want to build them into my coalition. But I have to be really careful here, because when I'm building a coalition, not only do I need to think about who is aligned with me and who has a lot of leverage versus the other people in this negotiation, but I need to think about, what do the relationships look like of the parties who are going to be part of the coalition? And this can be complicated. So let me give you a specific example. When the United States was thinking about starting a war with Iraq after Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait in the early 1990s, the United States realized it needed to build a coalition. Now, what we wanted at first in the coalition were moderate Arab states who would support this invasion. And then there's this natural coalitional partner for the United States in the Middle East. Israel was our strongest ally in the region. We have a long history together. It would seem to be a natural coalitional partner. The problem is, at the time, the relationship between Israel and the moderate Arab states, very bad, like non-existent, like enemies. So then U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker realized this would not a good coalition make. And so what he did is he understood that having the moderate Arab states was more important than Israel. And so he first spoke to Israel and said, we want you to know we have your back, but we need you to stand down here. We need you to stand down because we need to build the most robust coalition. And so strategic negotiators are not only identifying people who have shared interests and people who have leverage, but they're really thinking about, what will the relationship look like amongst the coalitional partners. Now, once you've decided who you want to be in your coalition, you now need to sequence, who do you approach first. So this may sound easy, but it's actually quite complicated. Really sophisticated negotiators think about what in our field we call patterns of deference. Okay, that sounds like super fancy. It's really not super fancy. It's basically thinking about if I want to get person X on board and I don't have much influence with person X, who can I identify who person X listens to? In other words, they defer to whatever that person says. And maybe that's person Y. So then I say, do I know person Y? I do know person Y. Okay, the way I'm going to get person X is I'm going to approach person Y with whom I have a relationship, and then person Y is going to be charged with getting person X on board. Okay, that's pretty abstract. Let me use a real life example from the entertainment industry, and that's quite recent. So some of you might remember the film that came out last year that was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture called Tick, Tick, Boom. In this really incredible show directed by the amazing Lin-Manuel Miranda, there is this particular song that comes up. It's a song that's called Sunday, and in it, there are stars from 40 years of Broadway musicals. And I got to tell you, I don't know a huge amount about Broadway stars and Broadway shows, but I did see this song and I thought this was a work of genius because it brings together stars from some of the leading Broadway shows. And they appear for these really brief cameos in this one number that was filmed during COVID. So in order to get all of these people to agree to be a part of this, they had to give up any projects they were working on. They had to all come together for a 2-week quarantine for a tiny cameo appearance. So I was pretty amazed when I saw the movie. And then interestingly, in November of 2021, Harper's Bazaar ended up writing this really fascinating article that looks at the negotiation that Lin-Manuel had to bring these parties into this song. And what's really interesting, if you read the article, first of all, right, it tells you how amazing this song is and how it's a riff from the Broadway show Sunday in the Park with George that was written by Stephen Sondheim. And then, although it's not talking in negotiation terms, you get this really interesting story because Lin-Manuel starts by talking to 3 very big household names in Broadway. Chita Rivera, who I suspect many of you know, Bernadette Peters, and Joel Grey. Now, as I said, I don't know much about Broadway, but those are 3 names that I know. And Chita Rivera is intrigued, open, but doesn't sign up yet. Bernadette Peters says, I'd really like to do this, but I'm going to check with Stephen Sondheim. He ends up saying, go ahead and do it. It sounds great. As soon as she says yes, when Joel Grey hears this, he's like, if Bernadette Peters is in, I'm in. Then Chita Rivera says, I'm in. Okay, you now have 3 big stars in this. What happens next? Then Lin-Manuel goes to Renee Elise Goldsberry. Now he knows her, right? She was in Hamilton with him. But when she hears this, she says, it's ridiculous to include me and Philippa Sue in this scene. Right? For us to be with legends like this is, quote, a tremendous honor. And then he goes to Bebe Neuwirth, who is in Chicago. And she hears that there are going to be Broadway legends in it. So she's on board. And then he goes to Beth Malone. So Beth Malone from Fun Home. And she's like, how in the world am I getting this phone call? So even if Lin-Manuel was not thinking about this in totally strategic terms, what he was doing was exactly what we talk about here. I'm going to think about who I want on board, and then I'm going to sequence according to deference patterns to make this work. Okay, the last thing you want to be doing was once you have a coalition is you need to figure out how do I manage that coalition? How do I keep everybody on board over the long term? And so this leads me to share 2 things. One very important aspect of coalitions that people often forget, and secondly, a key reason why coalitions hold. So here's something that people often forget, right? Coalitions bring all sorts of benefits to negotiation, but there's a really big danger in them. And that is that they are inherently unstable. So whenever a coalition is formed, if I want to, I can work to break that coalition. And we see all sorts of examples where that might happen. So what tends to be the glue that holds a coalition together? It is helpful if you have shared interests around substantive issues, but the real glue that holds a coalition together over time is less about shared issues than it is about shared values, shared identities. So it turns out what holds coalitions together is less shared substantive issues and more around deep values. So take a look at this picture. So the people sitting here in the Oval Office with President Reagan are Afghan freedom fighters, often called mujahideen. The United States and the mujahideen had an alliance in the late 70s and early 80s against a shared enemy, the Soviet Union. This picture might be surprising because it turns out many members of the mujahideen ultimately became the Taliban. And as most of us know, there is not an alliance between the United States and the Taliban. This coalition was a coalition of convenience around a shared enemy, and it doesn't hold the same way an alliance like the NATO alliance would hold, an alliance that's around not just shared interests, but deeply held shared values and identities. So, building coalitions is complex and important work in negotiation. If you want to succeed, first, think carefully about how do I target my coalitional partners. Second, build a strategy for sequencing who do I approach first, who's second, who's third. Third, constantly manage that coalition. Make sure it's holding firm, make sure it isn't shifting. If you want to learn more about how to improve as a negotiator, watch this next video, When You Should Not Negotiate at All. In addition, I'd be grateful if you would subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and ring the bell. Thanks for watching, and let's keep negotiating together. Okay, you really want to know when not to negotiate? Keep watching.